Hello, good evening and welcome to Biz1st Review 360. I'm Nadim Majid. Let's start tonight's program with a look at the top stories this week. After 2 weeks of negative publicity surrounding the Volkswagen and Marangoni investments, or lack thereof, the European Commission's announcement on Wednesday regarding GSP Plus has finally put a feather in the cap of the National Unity Government. However, the European Commission did say that it would continue to monitor factors including good governance and human rights.
The European Commission, releasing a statement on Wednesday, said it proposed the European Union to remove import duties on Sri Lankan products, restoring GSP Plus trade access to the island. The Commission statement said, quote, "These one-way trade preferences would consist of the full removal of duties on 66% of tariff lines, covering a wide array of products including textiles and fisheries," unquote. The European Parliament and the Council have 4 months to raise potential objections before the scheme becomes effective. The statement also said, quote, "Granting access to the GSP Plus scheme does not mean that the situation of the beneficiary country with respect to the 27 international conventions is fully satisfactory. Instead, it offers the incentive of increased trade access in return for further progress towards the full implementation of those conventions and provides a platform for engagement with beneficiaries on all problematic areas," unquote. Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs Dr. Harsha De Silva said he is confident that the government can secure the support of the European Parliament to ratify the scheme.
In July 2016, we made the formal application, and today we are very pleased that the European Commission has accepted our application. We thank them and we appreciate their action. Now we will have to continue to work towards implementing the 26 international conventions and covenants on human rights, on the rule of law, and on good governance. These are things that we had anyway undertaken to do through the 19th Amendment and others. For instance, on the 3rd of February this year, the Right to Information Act will become law in this country. Happy occasion. It is good for the economy. We can create jobs, bring in investors, and recapture what we lost in the European marketplace to other competitors. And also, very important is beyond apparels. There are so many other goods that we will be able to compete in the European market with the rest of our competitors.
It is stated by the European Council that as this GSP Plus will reduce 66% of the tariffs that are coming to the European soil. So this is a great advantage because in competitiveness, this enhances our competitive advantage. Once that objection period is over, by another 4 months, we may be getting the GSP Plus. As a result, our economy would flourish, the garment industry, fishing industry, and as well as 120 odd products will flourish in our country. Our employment opportunities will go up. And therefore, we are hoping that we may be getting more advantages through this package.
Now, following the European Commission's decision to restore the GSP Plus concession to Sri Lanka, Finance Minister Ravi Karunanayake offered foreign nationals depositing more than $300,000 in Sri Lankan banks 5-year resident visas and the right to lease land to investors who inject more than $1.5 million.
I call upon all investors that are looking at Sri Lanka with a new vision, with a new hope, with a renewed interest, and with GSPs coming in yesterday, it obviously accepts Sri Lanka as a very financially stable, politically well-led country. So because of that, I call upon people who have been investing in other countries, you look at Sri Lanka, which has shown last year fiscal consolidation with the financial discipline setting in. Please bring in your investments, your savings into this country. Don't get a negative return in your country. Get it here at a positive 2 to 3, 4%. This you can negotiate yourself, but it has to come through commercial banking system. Any Sri Lankan who has not had the confidence of investing in Sri Lanka, exports oriented, kept overseas, this is the time to bring it back. We don't want to ask questions, this is the time to bring your monies which are in other countries to be brought back. No questions will be asked. Only what we want is bring it in the official channels, and then our job is to ensure that we have a protection given as investors. All you got to do is get in the formal system. That's all we are basically saying. We don't want to have a witch hunt.
Also this week, cabinet approval was given to purchase 60 megawatts of emergency power through an international competitive bidding process after months of weak rainfall drastically reduced Sri Lanka's hydropower generation capacity.
Plants that could generate an additional 60 megawatts is to be installed at 3 or more suitable locations to ease the transmission constraints that have arisen in the central and southern provinces. The water in reservoirs have been at its lowest owing to weak rainfall during the island's twin monsoons. Energy regulator, the Public Utilities Commission, has recommended that more generation capacity be added to the national grid to ensure uninterrupted power supply. Cabinet approval has also been received to extend the expired agreement periods of the 3 furnace oil power plants for 6 months.
Coming up after this short commercial break, the views of Sri Lanka's shipping and logistics sector. Welcome back to Biz1st Review 360. In the wake of the strikes, protests, unrest and delays in inking an agreement with China Merchant Port Holdings to run the Hambantota Deepwater Port, I caught up with the CEO of the Shippers Academy Colombo, Rohan Masakorala, for a chat about the future of Sri Lanka's shipping and logistics sector. Mr. Masakorala, thank you very much for speaking to Biz1st Review 360. Let me start off by asking, we saw the events that unfolded in Hambantota during the groundbreaking ceremony, let's say for the Hambantota Industrial Zone. How will this affect investor confidence in Sri Lanka? How will this impact the project in question?
Well, first of all, it was an unfortunate situation that arose in Hambantota. As you know, we've been struggling to get Hambantota off the ground, to say, in terms of developing shipping since its inception in 2011. Various attempts have been made, but a realistic situation did not develop because the environment related to industry and factories coming up didn't happen. We just succeeded in getting vehicle transshipment moving in Hambantota. So Hambantota, I mean, we all in the shipping industry knows that it's a very highly potential port for global shipping because of its location. So you think it's, as the CEO of the Shippers Academy of Colombo, you think that Hambantota really is a viable option? It is a viable option, but the model that we thought was that it should originally have started as a ship bunkering port, where we should have invested in a refinery and then moved towards gradual development. Now, even if you look at Port of Colombo, we had a gradual development. We started with JCT 1, 2, 3, 4 like that and expanded to... When you're talking about Colombo, we see that in spite of the opposition to Chinese investors coming in Hambantota or all places, we see that in Colombo, the Chinese operated terminal, CICT, has been performing quite well. How do you compare these? Yeah, of course they have now touched the 2 million TEU threshold. That's about 53% of their capacity. Although we have a built operational capacity of 2.4 million, easily this terminal can handle up to 4 million TEUs if it's properly managed. So the Chinese obviously had a plan for this terminal, and also they had the direct advantage, it's being the deep draft port of or the terminal of Sri Lanka. So obviously the new generation ships just started coming into operation over the last 5 years, and those ships only can call at CICT. So they have an advantage over the rest of the terminals, and they are growing. So anyway, Port of Colombo has been one of the most successful ports in the last 5 years, where its volumes have been continuously going up at double-digit growth.
Mr. Masakorala, I want to ask you, when you see how the Colombo port has been expanding, like you said, gradual, and you see what the government is trying to do in Hambantota, do you think that there's a lack of policy cohesion?
Well, Sri Lanka as a country doesn't have a national policy in shipping. So obviously when government change, leaders change, ministers change, we have seen various policy changes happening, and that has not helped the industry. Of course, Hambantota has a potential because we are talking Colombo as a container port. Container ships are about 35 to 40% of the world fleet. Whereas the bulk shipping, the gas carriers, cruise tourism is rest of the shipping industry. So Hambantota being located just 12 nautical miles within the main east-west shipping route, if we build the correct facilities like bunkering, as I said, offshore bunkering, we can move towards a gradual development into a major port. But now since the Chinese have put the money in there, they have a global capacity. We must understand that Chinese have the cash at the moment, and they have a huge trade happening between their country and rest of the world. So they have the capacity to do business there and develop business. So we all understand the importance of a foreign investor coming and putting the money there and getting into it.
You said earlier that Hambantota is a viable option. We've seen that in India too. There are port developments that are happening, expansions and more development, foreign investment coming in. When those projects also get off the ground, will Sri Lanka and its ports, will our geographic location still be an advantage for us?
It will be, provided we get our act together in terms of policy, liberalization of certain services, where we invite foreign shipping companies to come and set up headquarter operations in this country, like going into some kind of a modern, like Singapore. Because India's development will happen anyway, and at the moment India has about 12 to 15 million TEUs. It is expected to double. So that is why India is putting up its own infrastructure. India's growth is Sri Lanka's benefit definitely, and Bay of Bengal growth is Sri Lanka's benefit. At the moment, containerization in the Indian East Coast is about 15%, whereas the rest of it comes from the West Coast. So I don't see any threat from India's development. In fact, it's an opportunity.
What's the future of the shipping and logistics industry in Sri Lanka right now, the way you see it? If the government is unable to handle the opposition to Hambantota, if that does not go ahead as planned, what's the worst case scenario?
Well, if Hambantota doesn't take off now and we have a so-called a joint government, it's a sad situation as far as I am concerned. But the government also is very weak in its marketing and the way it gives information to the public. So there is room for a lot of misinformation also going around. So, but I am very positive in terms of shipping to Sri Lanka, because we are just at the moment contributing less than 2.5% to the GDP in terms of shipping. So we have a lot of room, and globally we are recognized as one of the emerging.
You were talking about how this is a coalition or a government of consensus.
Yes.
They call it. Samutivadiyanuwa in Sinhalese. Are you disappointed from the perspective of a professional in the shipping and logistics industry? Are you disappointed with the inability to manage opposition in spite of the fact that the two biggest parties in the country are in the same government?
Yes, in somewhat it's disappointing, because policies have to be straightforward and told to the people, and those policies have to be defended properly. And I see that weakness because a lot of right things are being done, but again those are not communicated. As a result, I think there is a lot of space for people to criticize and question, and I hope now they have gone for 2 years, the next 3 years they'll put things right. That's my thinking.
Mr. Bhaskar, I wish you all the best for 2017.
Thank you very much. Same to you.
On the other side of this break, the future of export-led growth and the impact on Asia in general and Sri Lanka in particular. Welcome back to the program. On our segment Vital Statistics tonight, we take a look at export sector performance in September 2016.
Sri Lanka's external sector performance improved in September 2016 with a contraction in the trade deficit and continued growth in tourist earnings. Earnings from exports grew 5.7% year-on-year to $898 million in September 2016 compared to the $850 million recorded in September 2015. Seafood exports to the European Union has increased over 200% in September 2016 from a year ago, the central bank said.
On our segment Speak Your Mind tonight, we feature Dr. Ganeshan Vignaraja, a top economist and advisor to the Asia Development Bank. He was hosted by the Advocata Institute in Sri Lanka this week, a free market think tank, to deliver a lecture on export-led growth.
Export-led growth in one form or another are very much ingrained in Sri Lanka's development over the last several decades. Now a lot of this was to try to follow the route pursued by Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong, which succeeded with opening their economies and attracting investment from abroad as well as domestically, and expanding their exports enormously. And those countries have export bases of several $100 billion today. And we've seen the rise of global value chains, which is not just taking that capacity from those countries, but also putting it across geographical space, with final assembly happening in large hubs such as the People's Republic of China. So that is the kind of vision that Sri Lanka has or wishes to emulate. So we've had this global financial crisis in 2008, 2009, that saw a decline in exports and trade in general globally, right? So the rate of trade growth has come down significantly compared to the past. And in a few days' time, we will have the US President, the new US President, who talks about protectionism as possibly one of his big strategies. And he wants to bring jobs back to the United States. He's talking about a wall with Mexico. He's talking about tariffs against the People's Republic of China. So we had this kind of bout of export pessimism. So what does all of this mean for Asia, and what should we be thinking in terms of policies? My basic take is that this is not the end of export-led growth for the foreseeable future, but certainly trade is slowed in the region and globally. Although Sri Lanka is slightly different to the trend, which is an interesting opportunity for it, but to succeed further, we have to address certain critical constraints. A lot of that involves dealing with things like productivity, infrastructure, red tape. These are required, and we need to think about second generation reforms to try to deal with these issues. And we've got to think strategic of how we use trade agreements. And Sri Lanka's export base is around $16-17 billion today, and that's much better than the 80s, which was $3 billion. So the base has expanded. The challenge the country faces is the composition. Textiles and garments account for 45% of the goods exports, of the $10 billion worth of goods. And we have services which are important, tourism and remittances and so on, but we haven't had this sustained diversification to higher technology exports, electronics, machinery, automotives. We've not had the IT boom that you've seen in India. So the challenge is not so much the size of the base, but what's in that base. And if the country wants to prosper and continue to expand its growth, we have to get into those types of exports. We have to join these global value chains, which is this decentralized production that we see in East Asia, which account for about half of East Asia's exports. We're not really part of that so much. Textiles and garments are a small bit, but they're not really that type of production. The BPO sector and the IT sector was a big potential area for expansion, but when India got expensive, it didn't come here en masse. It went to the Philippines, where I now live. Okay? And part of the reason for that was the Philippines has quite good quality English-speaking graduates from their universities. They also have a time zone advantage, which we didn't have. And they have a population of 90 million people, which is a large economy. But that's entirely export-oriented sector largely. And demand in industrial countries has been very poor after the global financial crisis. Although the United States is in recovery mode, and ironically with Trump coming into power, people expect a kind of a boom in growth, which will also partly be led partly by trade. And that boom in growth may come from the fiscal investments he's going to make in infrastructure, the deficit financing that he talks about. But Japan and the European Union are in the doldrums in terms of their import demand from Asia. And I'll show you some numbers in a minute. So that's been an important factor in the slowdown in Asia and also Sri Lanka. A second important factor is the structural issues. The People's Republic of China has been rebalancing its trade and its investment-led model more towards domestic demand and services as costs have risen in China, right? And that has been a major factor for its less demand for imports from the rest of Asia. So that's an important issue because it accounts for at least 40% of the region's trade. These value chains, while they've been very important in driving Asia's growth historically over the 3 decades before the global financial crisis, these value chains have been slowing a bit. But with that comes the opportunity for countries like ours to enter those value chains. Yeah? And that's a really important thing to think about in terms of the opportunities. We've also had lower commodity prices that have affected the real income of producers, and we've had creeping protectionism, particularly non-tariff tariffs. Tariffs have fallen a lot across Asia. Average tariffs are some 8.9% across Asia as a whole, but we've had lots of these non-tariff measures, phytosanitary standards, technical barriers to trade, anti-dumping measures, and Asia is a bit the victim of this story, and so that's a problem. For a small country like this, exports are a critical engine of growth. We've got to think about exports, but it's been harder in the new atmosphere that we are, and we've got to deal with a lot of the domestic issues that are critical. The reason why I am not so pessimistic is that the US is coming out of recession, and as I said, 2017, 2018 may well be boom years at one level for the US in terms of growth. 2017, for instance, US GDP is expected to grow, according to what the IMF thinks, at 2.2% per year in 2017. In 2016 it was 1.6%. So US will pick up in some way, but not the 3% that we might have seen in the past in the US. So US is improving a bit, and that will suck in more imports. China, as it rebalances more towards domestic demand and services, is going to continue to grow. We're not going to have this hard landing that we're talking about. So the entry point for a country like Sri Lanka is the PRC is going to shed some of its labor-intensive sources, right? Textiles, garments, even auto and electronics, and that's beginning to happen in ASEAN countries. Vietnam, Indonesia, even Bangladesh is an important recipient of this. The question is, can Sri Lanka get some of this type of investment? We've got to think really about doing a much more enhanced set of second generational reforms. Dealing with red tape and behind the border barriers, we've got to think of upgrading the skills. We've got to enhance the finance that's available to SMEs, and we've got to invest a lot in ports, logistics and digital infrastructure. We should also look a little bit at concluding mega FTAs, particularly with important trading partners. So in this country, an FTA with China, for instance, could be advantageous depending on how we design it. Right? An FTA with Singapore, which has multiple FTAs with other partners, could also be of some use to a country like ours, because we could get multiple markets if we're able to export to it. There are going to be winners and losers. Any kind of liberalization will have this, and it's something called the Stokes-Samuelson theorem that says that the rents typically go to those sectors that are those with our competitive advantage. Yeah? The sectors that are disadvantaged and losing out will see losers. And we've got to make sure that we provide adjustment assistance to those losing sectors.
And that's a wrap of our show tonight. What are your thoughts on the future of export-led growth? Share your ideas with us on our Facebook page, Biz1st Review 360. I'll see you again, same time, same place next week. Until then, good night.